And on that note, let's hear more about Kristen. And if it's okay, Kristen, I'm going to just sing your praises for a minute.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As her publicist, so Kristen is a fellow Dookie, went to University of Virginia Law School, worked at a private practice in San Francisco, and then has worked at Paramount Pictures, United Talent Agency, UTA, Creative Artists Agency, CAA, and that's when I met Kristen, I believe.
Yeah.
And to keep her amazing career going, she is now at Netflix, where she has been for almost 3 years.
Yeah.
As Senior Counsel, Business and Legal Affairs for Original Films. And, those are just highlighting some of her amazing positions. But I also want to say that Kristen's just always there whenever I, have some students to talk to, or when you're at Duke in the past and you've been able to talk with students. Just so appreciative of kind of your openness to mentor and share advice, and the zigzags along the way that you encountered, and we're just excited to talk with you and just appreciate your time today. And thanks for, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here. I love talking to Duke students. I enjoyed my time there. But I also think about when I was sitting in your shoes, and I guess some of the questions that we talk about today might hit on this. Like, I had no idea what my path forward looked like. And it is a zigzagging sort of path, but I am happy to talk about where I am and how I got here, but it really wasn't something when I was sitting in your shoes that I even knew, honestly, I didn't even know it existed as a job. So it's inspiring to hear all of your stories, and the projects you're working on are really, really cool. But you're also at this point where you have this wonderful open mind, and I think that's useful when you move forward, because you just don't know which way you're going to end up going.
And I think that's a great starting point, actually, for our first question, is kind of a little bit about how you found your way into this kind of industry you're in. And I think if it's okay, Kristen, we could kick it to Aaron, who has a question around that.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. So I noticed that you have a law degree, and I just really wanted to understand, like, did you know you want to pursue a creative industry while you were at law school, or is that something you kind of developed during your studies in law?
Yeah, I didn't know that I would go into a creative industry when I was in law school. I went to Virginia. It was the late 90s. And they really didn't even have, I'm sure they do now, but they didn't even have like a robust entertainment law practice. There was like one elective that everybody wanted to take because it sounded fun. So it wasn't part of my strategy in law school. I did move to San Francisco after law school, and that was probably more a result of the technology boom that was hitting San Francisco, and I felt like that was an exciting place to be. But it was through my husband, who is a camera operator and more of was interested in writing and directing, that we moved to Los Angeles. And when I moved to Los Angeles, that's where I decided that I was really tired of the corporate law practice. And even though I am not as creative as any of you guys are, I am drawn to people that are creative and the creative environment. And I thought, how can I use maybe the more analytical business numbers type skills, negotiation, strategy? How can I use that in the artistic community? And I've sort of bounced back and forth. I spent 9 years representing talent. I actually worked with Julian Thwan at UTA for 2 years. So how can I partner with representatives of creative people in a way that helps them and advocates and fights for them, protects their rights, gets them as much money as you can? I was really drawn to that. Now I'm on the other side of those deals. I work for the studio for Netflix, and I engage all of that various talent. And I find this part of the role exciting too. I'm sure we'll get into that later.
Yes, we're actually going to get into a little bit of that with Irene's question.
Yeah, So you've worked as an attorney and also in business affairs, which seem like separate departments, but also the difference isn't super clear to me. So I'm wondering if you could explain what how they're
You know what, the difference is still not super clear to me, Irene. I'm going to be honest with you. Like the definitions are changing absolutely constantly. But I think that, the old studio system had two different divisions, business affairs and legal affairs. At Netflix, we've combined it into something called business and legal affairs. But I think that to get to business affairs, you should start with legal affairs. And it's not how everybody does it, but the basic distinction is the business affairs is making the deal. They're the people who make the very first phone call when a creative executive says, we heard a great pitch. We'd love to hire this writer to write the screenplay. Then they come to me and they tell me that. And I just had these calls this morning. I learn a little bit about the project, what the budget might be for the project. And then I do some quick online research on the writer. Who is this writer? What credits do they have to their name? And try to get a sense a little bit about what they might cost. And then I reach out and I spoke this morning on this one particular project with an agent and a lawyer for the writer to learn a little bit more about the writer and that writer's expectations for the project. So that's the business affairs function. And then I'm going to put together a proposal that I'm going to send around internally to Netflix that says, here's what I think we should offer her to write this screenplay. And here's where I think it's probably going to close, always more than what I start with. Pro tip to you guys, when you're negotiating, we start low with room to move up. But I'll sort of set an expectation, like, I think this is where this deal should close. Those are just sort of guesses as we start the process. And I'll go ahead and be the one that negotiates the deal completely. And when the deal closes, it then has to become a contract. And I have now reached the place, fortunately, where I don't have to draft that contract. That is, at a traditional studio, the legal affairs function. They'll be the one that takes my closed deal points, and they're probably just a couple of terms, the money, the credit, the services, and then the lawyer in legal affairs turns that into like a 30-page contract. And there's all kinds of other bells and whistles. I started being the person who drafted those 30-page contracts. I would receive the deal points when I worked at Paramount on closed deals, and then I would have to turn them into an agreement and get that agreement signed. And there was a whole lot of negotiating that still happens on all of those provisions. So it's really good practice for negotiating skills. And you have to understand a lot of the legal terms that I've now distanced myself from a little bit, like how do the indemnities work and who's responsible if this happens or that happens? What does breach look like? All that kind of stuff. So I still have that as part of my job responsibility because we are a combined group, but I focus more on the deal terms. Other people do the drafting. And then if there are real sticky issues, they come back to me and say, we can't close this particular point. What do you want to do? Do you want to reach back out to the other side and negotiate it more? Should we just take some risk? And I'll be the one that kind of makes that decision, how we handle that from there.
Andy.
Yeah, so I guess to follow up on that question, what does a day as a business and legal affair representative look like? And then to follow up on that question, how has that changed since like COVID, and how has that kind of shifted with quarantine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So business and legal affairs business and legal affairs person, it would look a lot like the way I just described a typical day, because that is exactly what happened to me this morning. And even though I had a number of things on my plate to do, that became a priority because I don't have to start the deal today, but I needed to reach out. This particular writer has a really interesting and hot pitch, and we want to get it before they take it to everyone else. So I had to drop everything else and make immediate contact with that agent and lawyer to say, I'm going to make you an offer. Give me a couple more. I have some questions. Let's talk about some details. And then I bought myself a little time, and I won't actually make the offer until like Monday. So like important deal making becomes the priority. But also in my typical day, I now supervise a number of more junior lawyers who do business affairs. And when there's a straightforward deal and it's not time sensitive, I'll pass it off to one of those people, but oversee them. So my typical day involves check-ins with a lot of those people. They'll come to me with their questions on their deal. They'll say, we received a counter. Here's what the other side said. What should we do? And I always say, well, what would you do? And I make them tell me first. And then we talk about, what I like about their proposal, or maybe something they haven't thought of yet. So I do a lot of supervising of more junior business affairs type people. And then I have to answer all those legal questions that are bubbling up as people are trying to draft contracts based on my deals. They'll be like, I think you totally forgot something, or this part of your deal doesn't even make sense. I got one of those yesterday. Like, what were you trying to say here? And then we talk through all of that. It's very collaborative at Netflix, which is something I really, really like. We're one combined team. So we all talk about all of this and a lot. But then to your second point, what's now overwhelming my time in COVID is how do you produce a $100 million movie in the world of COVID? It is so risky. It is so expensive. There are so many new production issues that I am involved in far more production conversations than I was before. Before, when a movie kind of was about to start, my role receded a little bit because we'd already done the deals. And I had to make sure the contracts were all getting signed, but then I was kind of done. And now just these questions around how you film a movie in this environment and how do you do it safely and responsibly, it takes up a lot of bandwidth, a lot of time.
And to follow up on that, Kristen, are you in production on a couple of these things, or how's that?
Yeah, we had some movies that were in production and then they shut down as a result of the pandemic. And those films, a lot of them have resumed. So our first experiences with producing in a COVID environment, has been to finish the movies that were paused or that had to stop. And then I'm working on a couple that are going to be starting soon. So, from the get-go, we're able to look at, what would we need to do to make this a safe experience in order to produce. And, some of that depends on the location of the film, because different countries have different requirements in order to film. So it's a lot to consider.
Wow. Thank you for doing what you do. Yeah, so let's go to Andres. And Andres, your question, you just want to tweak it a bit because she's answered a couple of those parts of it.
Yeah, definitely. So just to follow up with what you've been talking about, are you involved in the legal side of development, production, content acquisition, like all the different parts that go into making a movie, or is it more specialized and you'll focus more on production and writer's deals, and then a junior lawyer will focus more on other types of deals?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the way we have it broken out, there are a lot of lawyers at Netflix and there are a lot of departments at Netflix, but within my particular department, which is original studio films, and those are the movies that we make in-house from development through production, rather than licensed movies. For example, we have a group that does smaller budget movies. We have a group, there's a variety of different types of lawyers, but within the group that does original big budget films, then I oversee the whole process from the acquisition of the underlying IP. So the earlier example I gave was based on a writer coming in and doing a pitch. But we also do a lot of book rights acquisitions. So I will be involved in acquiring the motion picture rights to a book, a popular book or a book that's about to be published. And then I'll be involved in the writer who's put on to adapt that work, the producer deals, the director deal, and then the cast deals. So I'm involved in all of that, but I may not handle all of those deals. I was mentioning that we have a great large team. So depending on the complexity of the deal and the experience of the person I'm working with on that project, like they'll do some of those deals as well. And I will just sort of have an eye on or supervise the process. And then we move into production. And we have a lot of other lawyers that work in production too. Like we have a whole labor division that gets involved in all kinds of guild and union issues. We have IP lawyers that might review some of the chain of title. Trying to think of the other divisions of lawyers. There are HR lawyers, employment lawyers. So there are different specialists, but I remain involved in the production of the project and sort of oversee those different teams of lawyers as they're needed for particular issues.
Thank you. That's a great 3L question there, Andres. So let's go to Sophia. Sophia, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, my internet is just a bit slow.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah. So my question was about just like what, from a business and legal point of view, what sets a successful film or production apart from not so successful ones?
I liked that question actually, because we tend to measure success in terms of how many people watched it. Obviously, we want to attract people to watching it, or maybe even just the quality of the film. If maybe it's not one that's a huge commercial success, but you're just super proud of the high quality of the film and the filmmaking. From a business and legal affairs perspective, I personally might look at these movies a little differently than the obvious. So the first is like, did we have all the rights we needed to make the movie? Like that's incredibly important. Now that's almost always a yes, but were there issues? Did people come out of the woodwork? Did we not somehow get all the rights we need? That would be not successful. And then also kind of thinking of the cost of the film. Like does what we had to pay the cast and the filmmakers and the rights justify in the end result, when we see how many people watched the movie, does that line up? Or maybe there were other reasons why we spent a lot of money on talent in that film. Like we were trying to get a really great, well-known director to come and do a movie for Netflix. And so there maybe was a premium on the cost there. But I think ultimately we look at our deals like, do those deals seem to make sense now that we've seen how popular the movie really was? And that's just a different lens to sort of review.
Thanks. Let's go to Ganesh.
I think like along the lines of like taste and success. What has been your favorite original Netflix movie and favorite original series?
My favorite series lately, and this changes like every week if you were to ask me the question, I would say, but I don't know if any of you have seen Unorthodox, but I just think it is like incredible. And it's only 4 episodes, so everyone has time to watch it eventually. But the storytelling and the acting, it was just blew my mind. I loved it. I loved the characters, loved everything about it. So, and I love that I work at a place that is making that movie or that series. And it has been super successful, but I don't know that people even expected it to be as successful as it has been. So that's been that one I love. And then another one on the film side that I've been a part of is not released yet. It comes out in November, but it's been a wonderful experience so far. Based on the August Wilson play, it's called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and sort of in the canon of plays where he wrote Fences. It's a version of that. It stars Viola Davis and Chadwick Boseman and was Chadwick's last performance. And it is exceptional. So it is something to be super, super proud of, and even more special, given what has come to pass. So that one, be looking out for that a little bit later this year.
Yeah, I just saw the trailer for that Denzel directed too, right?
Denzel produced it.
Produced it.
It was directed by more of a Broadway director, but Denzel was directly involved as a producer.
Well, I thought the trailer was incredible. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. And Unorthodox, well, that was inspired by a book. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, and a true story at that.
I thought that was an incredible series as well. I wanted like more of those episodes. It was amazing. So yeah, kudos on both of those. And for the creative writers in the room here, I mean, I think that's a good thing to watch as well, is like see how that was translated, read the book, and then watch the series, and kind of you can kind of see how that came to life in those different ways. Okay, we're still going here. Thank you, Kristen. You're so helpful and specific in your answers. We appreciate it. I'm learning a lot too. Let's go to Irene again. Great question, Irene.
Yeah. What are the business and legal considerations for Netflix original films, or like how are they different from the considerations for like original TV shows?
So we're comparing film and series right now.
Yeah.
So I have less experience in the series side of things. I did do a little bit of series in my background when I was at UTA. I did deals for both film and series, but otherwise in my career, I've always been on the film side. But I think probably the biggest distinction is the ongoing, like in series, you have to be ready for future seasons of the show. So from a deal making perspective, you have to lock up whether it's the writer or the actor for the potential like 6 years out. It's a lot of time, and there's a lot of negotiation around that sort of thing. Like how many episodes in the season do you guarantee to the person? And then what does it look like for you to have an option to pick them up? But you have to have options, especially on your cast, because you really don't want them to drop out and then you're stuck with everyone in love with your character and the actor's not there anymore. So that whole thing doesn't really exist in film unless you're talking about a movie that you really believe will be a franchise. And in the world of franchise filmmaking, you do have to have some of those conversations with the cast, like trying to lock in a future deal for them up front. But there's a lot less of that than there is on the television side of things. But right now, I think we're finding a lot of material can be made either way. Unorthodox is an interesting example because I think a long time ago, people thought film was a better home for a book. But the truth is, if your book has a lot to say, you have a lot more time to say it in a limited series or an ongoing series. So it's an interesting consideration from the creator's perspective, like how they want the story to be told.
Let's go back to Andres.
Sorry, everyone, this is another legal question, but how was your transition from working at a big law firm to working in-house? And what practice group were you in when you were at a big law firm? And did the skills that you learn at the law firm translate to in-house? And would you suggest for a law student who is planning on, or whose goal would be to go to in-house to like entertainment company, would you suggest a similar path of doing the few years at the big law firm and then transitioning?
Great question. Couple in there. So I was a litigator at a big law firm. I would not necessarily recommend that path. That is an unorthodox path, to use a word we've been using. So when we moved to Los Angeles, I was still a litigator at a big law firm. They had an office in Los Angeles, so I could transfer to that office, but then I started looking to leave. And it was difficult, as it is for anybody to find another job, to transition from being a litigator to going in-house at an entertainment company doing transactional work, because I didn't have transactional experience and I didn't have entertainment experience. So you pound the pavement and get in touch with everyone you have ever known, including everyone that ever went to Duke or UVA Law or my old law firm of any kind. And, you know, a lot of people didn't want to interview me, but I finally found my way into an opportunity at Paramount in the film group, which is amazing, except that at the time, the head of legal didn't want to hire me because for a number of reasons, but I had no experience, was one of them. So she recommended me to a group that doesn't exist anymore that made direct to home video movies. So Paramount had this idea of taking their popular franchises and spinning them out on direct to video type subsequent productions. And I jumped at the chance. So I think the first rule is, although I took an over a 50% pay cut from big law firm life, that if you want to move into something that you think you're going to love doing, you know, if you can at all scrape by, it was worth it to me, even though I had a 1-year-old daughter and my husband was a film student at the time. So it was not the most economically safe time in our lives to drop that income, but we just made it work is the way I would say it. And honestly, it was a super happy time in my life because I was leaving this like world of corporate litigation and walking onto the Paramount lot, even in my teeny tiny little role doing direct to video movies. It just was so incredibly inspiring and exciting to be a part of that. And not long after I joined that group, I did start learning the skills of doing these types of long form agreements for writers, actors, directors, producers. It was just on a smaller scale of home video movies. It was still original content. They at Paramount got rid of that whole division, but that same head of legal that I had met earlier remembered me and she hired me. And at that time she said, okay, now you've actually been trained in the Paramount way, on the Paramount forms. I don't have to do all that heavy lifting with you anymore. You can now have a job in this group. So it was a bet that paid off for me. And she liked me, I forgot to mention, because she had been a litigator. And she thought litigators had a way of looking at transactions that was different and could see more quickly red flags and problem areas because they were used to litigating those problem areas. So I appreciated that point of view with her. So I do think those skills that I had as a litigator have come to help me in drafting contracts and as a negotiator, because I don't see every provision the same. And I don't know if transactional lawyers do, but like, you know, every paragraph of the contract is not the same thing. There are some that are way more important than others, way more problematic, way more risky. And I think litigation skills have allowed me to see those faster. So I think almost everything you do is going to build in some way on the next thing you do. And almost nothing is a total waste of time. I think they've all contributed to sort of the next step. Maybe it's just a relationship that you make, honestly. But in the world of entertainment, relationships count a lot. And they probably do in every industry, but I can certainly tell you they do in this industry. So it's hard to see any sideways path as something that's not useful for later.
Thank you. Let's go to Andy, if you're still with us. I think you're next.
I'm here.
Oh, cool.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay. Quick question. I don't know much about law, so I might need you to clarify what is the difference between a litigator and a transactional lawyer? That would be my first kind of off the table question.
Gotcha. So in the world that is not criminal law, the more of like civil contractual type disputes, you have two types of lawyers at any big law firm, generally speaking. You have a group that are litigators. Litigators go into courtrooms. That's what a litigator does. Someone comes to you with a dispute. Maybe it's some contract that they think there are two corporate entities involved in a contract and they're now fighting over some part of it. Once they get to the fighting over it part and one of them says, I'm going to sue you, then you bring in your litigators. And those are the people who ultimately either settle these disputes or go into courtrooms and fight them out in court. The other type of lawyers at big law firms are transactional lawyers. And those are the people who are just negotiating contracts, and they're never going to go into a courtroom. If you have some gigantic deal that's being negotiated, it finally gets signed, and then down the road there's a problem with it, then you turn it over to the litigators to like work out the problem or to start going into court. So the entertainment world is not litigation. I am negotiating what will eventually be long form contracts, and they'll move to a signature. So it's not directly related to, I don't, ever sue any of the people I don't sue our writer, our director. If something awful happened, which hasn't in the whole time I've been doing this business, like you would turn it over to professional litigators to work it out.
Okay, so I guess, so my actual question, I guess, was, now that you've kind of experienced, doing like big corporate law litigation, and then a little bit of that Paramount vibe, and then UTA, like kind of in the role of representing
Yep.
people, and then now at Netflix, like, can you speak to how the culture at each of these companies are different? Like for example, like you always hear about how tech companies, like the culture is like super great and everything. So I'm curious, like, if you feel that now that you're at Netflix, or if it's still kind of more similar to like Paramount, which is a
Right.
more strictly entertainment company.
Great question. And I do think the culture is really different at Netflix than it is at Paramount. So they're not similar just because they're both studios making content. Netflix has online a culture memo that's just sort of an available document that really digs in and describes like how Netflix functions as a company. And it's probably, I haven't worked at another tech company, but it's probably some similar characteristics and then some unique. But there are, just as an example, it is a culture that has a lot more transparency than an old school studio. So you do get a lot of information about how well the company is doing, how well individual movies are performing. Whereas when I was at Paramount, I never had any visibility into how Paramount was doing. I mean, you could see box office results from movies, but there was all kinds of other information that would not have been shared with me. Whereas at Netflix, that kind of information is more available. So it's a huge difference. And there's also a lot more at Netflix than Paramount in terms of giving feedback. I think that's another sort of hallmark of the company, where anyone I work with can give me feedback at any time and I can give it to them. And it's like an expectation at the company that you do that. It's not considered rude or mean or not polite. It's considered like what you're supposed to do. And at the same time, you're supposed to receive this feedback in an effort not to be offended by it, but to like improve. So there's an ongoing conversation, both like upward, like to the people that you report to, and downward in terms of giving constructive feedback. When I say constructive, I mean actionable, something that you can take and incorporate and do differently or improve upon. And I did not see that happening at Paramount. There was not a lot of me giving feedback to my boss, put it that way.
That's interesting. And that seems pretty unique at a company that size as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick follow-up to that. How does that feedback get communicated? I'm just curious. Is there a certain method, or is it just up to the person?
Yeah, there are, you're encouraged at any time, like to say, hey, Amy, we've been working together for a couple months on this project. I'd love to set time next week, half an hour, just to get some feedback, from you on how I'm doing. Like that conversation is encouraged and happens. There's also a more formalized structure where once a year we provide written feedback into a tool, and then that tool spits it out to the people that are to receive it. And it's not anonymous, like your name is on it. But if you guys on this Zoom were all the people in my department, I would try to give written feedback to all of you. And it kind of goes, and then at this one moment in time, I would receive all of your feedback to me and get a chance to read it. It's not tied to compensation. It's just meant to be a written opportunity to provide feedback. And you're also not really supposed to give or receive feedback that you haven't already mentioned to the person before. It's not supposed to be shocking, but there are, but there's a lot of reasons to write it down. And sometimes maybe you thought you said something to somebody, but they didn't quite hear it in that way. So there's a written opportunity, and then there's encouraged more, like informal along the way type of opportunities. And then I think I see more at Netflix meetings that we will have maybe after a movie is finished filming. We might get the whole team together, what the creative exec, the lawyers, the production execs, the finance people, everybody in a room, and just say, like, let's talk about what worked really well on this movie that we want to broadcast to other people on our team so that they can do it. And let's also talk about what didn't work and didn't work well. And maybe we had a bad experience with an outside third party of some kind. And we think we want to acknowledge that, talk about what maybe we could have done differently, and then consider bringing it back to our individual teams so they can learn. The whole point is not to like broadcast mistakes, but to learn from them. So I think this sort of notion of encouraging feedback and building a muscle that around giving and receiving feedback, it leads to those other kinds of conversations too.
Yeah, definitely. If any of you all watch the Demon Weekend-ish with Blackish and Grownish writers this week, I'm just thinking as Kristen's talking about just the feedback and then like how it's communicated, and in the writer's room, it's just like everyone, like there's no like, let me slip you a note under the table. It's just like all out there at all times, and talk about building that muscle. I think that's super, I think if we could all find ways to do that in our own way now, then when you all are in your awesome jobs after Duke, gosh, I can only imagine the amazing constructive communities we could build. Very cool. So we have one more kind of selected question. I think it's Aaron. And then we can see if we have time for folks who maybe haven't had able to ask a question before we do some presentations. So Aaron.
Yeah, so I guess my last question was, what is your biggest, and I want to put emphasis on this, like unconventional way to break into the creative industry?
What would be I don't know if it's unconventional, but to get noticed is not easy. I mean, relationships are obviously going to help. And to the extent that you can actually get something produced and maybe screened at a film festival, I think that's also a great way for your work to get out there and for other people to see it. And possibly then you get representation and more people will see it.
Good advice. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the questions that Kristen had selected from your weeklies. We have a couple, about 5 minutes or so. If folks who haven't asked a question yet, if that's okay, Kristen,
Sure, yeah.
or if someone had a follow-up that they were just dying to ask and you've already asked, that's okay too. Open the floor for that.
May I ask another question?
Sure.
So I'm actually really curious because I was doing a project on like Netflix's like documentaries, and I realized that there isn't a lot of information about like the specific like watch times and like viewership data like available to the public. So I'm curious, like from like a legal and business perspective, why that is. Like, is it to like make sure that the focus is still on the creative content generation, or is it just more for like protection of privacy sort of thing?
Yeah, it's I don't really know the reasons or like the company's reasons for that, but I do know it's like highly guarded information. And with the particular filmmakers, they will like set up some confidential meetings and give some feedback around some of that information, but it's not like a publicly revealed number for every type of content. Whereas, like I mentioned before, in the world of studio films, you have box office receipts, so you can see that measure. And in television, there are ratings that people review. I could guess as to a lot of reasons. I think there's a lot that's positive about it, but I wouldn't know. It's not a privacy issue. I think it's just a business decision.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Nope.
I have a question. So you mentioned something about a hot pitch and how people drop everything to go after that. So what really makes up a hot pitch? Can everyone spot a hot pitch from a mile away?
No.
And like, and like when you're negotiating the price, I'm sure you've seen a lot of deals at this point. So how much agency do you have with it? Like, or is it, or are they like, oh, we really, really want, just get them no matter what type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There's like some art and some science in coming up with the numbers around what you're gonna pay. I don't think there's ever a we want it no matter what situation, but you could want it a lot, and you could want it for all kinds of different reasons. It could be brilliant on its face. It could have an attached element like a director or an actor that the studio is just so excited to be in business with. And if that actor is interested in that material, then it makes the material that much more appealing to us. So maybe it's diversifying like our slate or the people that have worked with us. It could be that with something becomes more popular for us because we've been looking to fill a need. Like we have a slate and there are different types of movies on it, but maybe there's like one particular kind of movie that we think would round out our yearly slate. And then this pitch addresses that particular genre. Like that could make it more interesting. So I think there are just a variety of things that could make it hot. That's not necessarily my world. I get it and then I try to judge, is this something, like you said, not that we will pay anything to have, but we really, really want. So that could make it more expensive potentially.
Are there any specific niches do you think that need to be filled at Netflix right now?
Well, I would say, I don't know how long-term this is, but it's true that I think it'd be wise to look at filmmaking from a COVID perspective. So projects that are going to require stadiums to be filled with people or globe trotting around international cities, which may have been really cool 2 years ago, are just a practical impossibility right now. So the types of movies that are more contained and with fewer cast, I am not the person that like picks the movies that we do, but I would say those are smart decisions right now because they can be made more safely without jumping around to lots of, you could create an environment with a bubble and protocols and you're staying in one spot with few cast members. That seems to be really smart. Musicals, I think, have some trouble. Not that they can't be done, but the science says singing in small environments is a way of spreading the virus. So you have to figure out like what does that look like if we have a song number in a movie. It's probably going to be a little more expensive than it would have been before.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Okay, so I understand you worked on both sides for Julian Twan, which is really cool, remembering it now, and for the studio. So within negotiations wise, is there like you mentioned something about, how you give them a first offer and then there's like an expected offer. So is there like a typical dance, or are there any I hope to be from the other side at one point. So like, are there any negotiating tactics? Yeah, from the talent side that specifically work.
Yeah, I think I spent 9 years on the talent side. So I definitely have an affinity for it and got a lot out of it. You want to make them make the first offer. So you don't want to lowball yourself. Like let the studio make the offer, and then just know that they have more there to give. They are almost never offering the actual number. Now, that could happen, like if I had a close relationship with an agent or a lawyer on the other side and we had no time and there was like an emergency, I might call up somebody who knows and trusts me and say, this is really the top. And if you guys can't do it for this, no hard feelings, but we have to move on like tonight because the movie starts in 3 days. Like that could happen. But for the most part, there's a little wiggle room. And then the other thing is money is important for sure. I'm not saying it's not, but sometimes there's flexibility on other parts of a deal that are really important to you as the creator. It could be that you care about your credit. It could be that you care about the availability you have to work on other projects at the same time, because exclusivity gets negotiated. So you might say, okay, they can't pay me, I'm a writer, and they can't pay me as much as I want to write this screenplay, but I can leave myself some room to work on other stuff at the same time. So maybe there's other parts of the deal that you can enhance. Maybe you can get a commitment to be involved in subsequent version, like sequels. Like, you know, you want to think long-term. I want them to come back to me. So I want, this was my baby, it was my material. I want to be involved in the sequels and not cut out of those. So there's a variety of other things that you might be able to negotiate, even if the money isn't going anywhere or is sort of done. And that's where bringing in an agent or a lawyer or a manager who's seen lots of deals and knows is really important. And where it's important for you to find your voice and tell your rep what matters to you, because then they can use that. It was always more powerful as a representative when I knew what the talent cared about. Because sometimes, and now when on this side, I want to reach out and say, what does your client really care about? Because some agents are just going to ask for everything, to bluster and ask for everything. But I'm listening for the thing that I think really matters to the talent, to sort of cut through it and get it done.
Thank you. That was so helpful.
You're welcome.
Marlo, I saw that you might have a question.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, in terms of COVID, have you seen a type of shift in terms of content developers' desire to work with like animated films versus like live action or ones that use people?
I haven't noticed the shift, but I know that like the animation department is going full force ahead. There's a lot. I think there was like a moment where we had to like modify the equipment and get it, you know, either in people's homes or in a safer environment for the animators to come together. But there is a lot of animation that is happening.
We heard that too on from Rob Chavis of Blackish. They did a couple special election animated episodes, and I keep hearing more and more Dookies doing animation.
Awesome.
Yeah. So let's see. Before we go to Ganesh for his presentation, I wanted to ask you just a follow up, Kristen. You said some interesting things. Well, so many interesting things, but I was curious in terms of kind of the other Dookies that you might work with at Netflix, like Peter or others. I know you're not in the office these days, but do you come across other Dookies at Netflix?
I guess Peter counts to me, but he's a creative exec in the series group, so I don't work with him closely. Although I've run into him at our more of like our business meetings and talk to him there. So I don't know that we have too many more. Oh, Eric Liang is a Dookie. I don't know if you know that name.
Oh yeah, he was at ABC, I think. Is now he's at
he was at Disney for a long time. I knew him back at Paramount. We worked together at Paramount. He once at Paramount reserved a conference room for us to watch Duke in March Madness. And what we didn't realize, like we were screaming with this one other guy. And when the game ended and we walked out of the conference room, there was a whole line of people waiting to get into our conference room We didn't realize it had gone over time, and it was so embarrassing. But they didn't know what we were meeting about. Like, you
That's
know,
amazing.
actually, we just tried. We just had to find a TV on the lot. That's what that was about. So Eric is here, and he's a lawyer in the series side of things. Eric is awesome.
Yeah.
And then there are a variety of Duke people out in the world that I talk to and liaise with. But I
Great.
don't have a good list of all of them at Netflix. There's probably more.
I'll work on that list for
Yeah.
you and connect you all. And you mentioned one other thing. I know Paul's taking a quick minute to get something. So before we do their presentations, you mentioned, you know, a lawyer, manager, agent,
Mhm.
all, you know, key kind of team roles. And I was wondering just if you could kind of briefly make those kind of distinguish between those. And you know, the question I get from a lot of creatives, specifically students, is, okay, I have this IP, this intellectual property, this thing I created, which all of you have. Which do I need an agent? Do I need a manager? Do I need a lawyer? Like, how do I protect what I have? And I wondered if maybe you could, I know that's like could be a very long, deep conversation, but kind of maybe a tip or two for all the students in the room here.
Yeah. Well, to have all three of those is very expensive. So I wouldn't recommend anybody feel like they have to have all three of those people in their camps. An agent takes 10% of everything you make. An entertainment lawyer takes 5%, and a manager takes 15%. So you add that up, and it is, you know, your checks diminish greatly. When I worked at the agencies in business affairs, I often worked with new, younger clients who did not have an outside entertainment lawyer. So the business affairs lawyers are free. They are included in the 10% that an agent charges you. So I think that's a little pro tip that the entertainment lawyers wouldn't like me saying, but it could save you that bit of money, and you wouldn't need a manager for a while. Now that said, if you had like IP that you were trying to protect, and somebody came to you to negotiate a deal, then you would need or you might just go after an entertainment lawyer at that point. The agent is really useful once they're representing you to try to bring you work. That's what their job is, to understand what opportunities are out there in the world and bring them to you, or to take your material, like your screenplay, and pitch it around town. Like, that's what an agent is great at. But if you already have like an offer, then you could use an entertainment lawyer just to protect you and work out the deal terms, and they'd be a little cheaper. There are also entertainment lawyers that work by the hour. So there's a number of those that you could just pay an hourly fee to like negotiate out the contract the ones I've been describing. And then some people find it easiest when they're starting out to get a lit manager on their side. And I don't know that every lit manager charges 15%. That's like the standard. So maybe you could find one that gives you a little bit of a deal. Or a break on that. But I think a lot of lit managers go to festivals, and you might find someone interested in representing you. That might be the first step in, you know, is to have a manager represent you.